So, something I've been wanting to kind of go over and talk about with the explosion of overlanding in the last pushing on 3 years. Probably the number one, maybe number two, just depends on, I guess, what community forum you're in. Number one vehicle, number two vehicle that's being purchased, obviously Tacomas and 4Runners. A lot of these 5th gen 4Runners, like what I own. I come from a background with 4Runners. I've owned 2 4Runners. I still own both of those 4Runners, this being one of them. And one thing that I can say, so I kind of, somewhat consider myself an expert on really the 5th gen 4Runner for sure, and to an extent a 4th gen 4Runner. So I wanted to talk about, I've now owned this vehicle for 3 years. I've put 81,488 miles at the instant that I'm recording this on the truck. So I would consider myself at least reasonably qualified enough to talk about some of the pros and the cons of making this a full-time overland vehicle.
Okay guys, so like I was saying earlier, I've owned 2 4Runners. This is a 2015 Toyota 4Runner. I just wanted to go over some of the pros and some of the cons that I've experienced over the last 3 years of ownership with this vehicle, using it for overlanding. Okay, so I'm going to start up here at the front because a lot of the problems with this 4Runner they occur up here, this engine. So when the vehicle is stock, it's fairly reasonably powered. Makes 278 brake horsepower, about the same amount of torque. Both of those are available at relatively high RPMs, something like between 4,800 and 5,400 RPM. Nothing too crazy. The main issue lies when you start putting weight on the vehicle. So when you start adding weight to this vehicle, it has a very low differential between the weight of the vehicle and the GVM. So once you start adding things like front bumpers, rear bumpers, rock sliders, roof racks, rooftop tents, storage, all your camping gear, you put 2 or 3 people in it, put some dogs in it, you're pretty much right at the GVM without anything else. So the main issue that really lies there is now you're putting a lot of stress on this engine. With that being said, it's even further exacerbated by the fact that there's not a lot of performance upgrade options for this engine in particular. The only real power boost that is currently on the market that's available is a supercharger from Magnuson. Now it's going to put you back into the area of roughly 320, 330 horsepower. At least that's what their dyno numbers say. Now there are some companies. I know a company personally that is out of Salt Lake that's working with a company here in Vegas that has actually managed to crack the ECU on these things, which no one's been able to do in the 8 years this truck's been around. And they're claiming they now have a chip and they have a tune that makes equivalent horsepower, which I'm going to be looking into this summer. But that's something that you don't necessarily think of when you're doing overlanding. We all like to take our gear with us. We really like to load these things down and just go out camping. Well, the thing is, when you go and do that, you're really starting to tax the engine and you're really lacking power. Now, tying in power, this thing stock doesn't get very good gas mileage. If you're looking for something that's economical, this is really not what you really need to buy. When you start adding all of that on, all the extras on there, it gets even worse. Anybody that has built a 4Runner that hasn't done gears, that is running a relatively stock as far as powertrain wise, and has loaded all the stuff on there, knows what I'm talking about. So at the peak, or I should say the lowest point as far as MPG with me and this truck in particular, I was averaging about 11.5 miles a gallon. On a 23 gallon tank, you can imagine I could only go about 200 miles between fill-ups, which when you're overlanding is kind of a problem. So make sure that you kind of keep that in mind when you're looking to build a truck and when you're looking to buy this 4Runner. In my opinion, this all could really kind of be solved with a little bit different gearing. I'd love to see some 410s offered in this truck, but 410s don't fit in this truck. I'd also like to see, maybe just another gear. Instead of a 5-speed, give it a 6-speed. There's a lot of times when I'm between 5th and 4th gear in this truck, and a gear in between those would have solved a lot of my problems. So I covered the cons with the engine, now the pros. It's a Toyota engine. This engine in its iteration has been around since 2003. So they've just released the 2019s, so it's got something like 16 years of heritage, 16 years of reliability. My other 4Runner, which is right there, that's a 2007. It's got the same engine. This one's just making a little bit more horsepower, and I've got 190,000 miles on that thing. And the only issue I've ever had out of it was I had to change the alternator about 10,000 miles ago. Other than that, you just do basic maintenance, and the thing's basically bulletproof. Okay, so moving around to the back of the vehicle, one thing that I want to talk about is storage space. Now, Toyota's website says that this 4Runner has 47.2 cubic feet of storage. Whatever that means to you, I'll let that mean to you. But basically with me, I have plenty of room back here to carry all my camping gear. Now, granted, we've bought a trailer, so I've exported a lot of that to the trailer. But before then, we carried everything in the truck. We've utilized our roof storage as much as we can. I know that, when you have a rooftop tent, it's very difficult, so storage space on the inside is kind of at a premium. But for me, it's one of the pros. Being a vehicle this size, it has very adequate storage space. And the seats being able to fold down basically flat. I know there's a little bit of an arch there or a hump there, but for the most part, it's completely flat, really doubles down on that storage space. Okay, so here in the interior of the 4Runner, I personally have the premium model. Now, if you're going to get the premium model, one thing that you should know is that unless you buy the limited, you're going to get leather seats, but they're not real leather. What I've found is that these leather seats, 80,000 miles, I've gotten in and out of the truck quite a lot over the last 3 years. As you can imagine, lots of dirt, lots of dust. So far, I've been pretty happy with them. I think they could be a little bit more comfortable. They're not the most comfortable seats that I've ever sat in my entire life, but they're very, very durable. They're comfortable enough. I'm a big fan of the heated seats, and it's a very roomy interior overall. My main con with this interior is that I just don't feel like it's that high quality. I've had some issues with the dash, chipping paint, with very minimal wear. I've had a really big issue with the steering wheel. The steering wheel's kind of let me down, mainly because I know it's in the sun, I know I live in the desert, but I've had some pretty significant wear, and I guess it's discoloration or bleaching of the steering wheel in places that are not high friction. It's all up here on the very top of the steering wheel, and I actually don't ever find myself really grabbing the steering wheel there. I mostly grab it at 10 and 2 like you're supposed to. Beyond that, it's kind of a known issue. The infotainment system, this Intune system they put in these things, it's a problem. I've had to have it updated, I think 3 times, and the main issue every single time that I have to have it updated is it'll just randomly turn off. And when you're driving or you're doing navigation or anything like that, it's a problem because when it turns off, it resets. Beyond that, I don't really have too many issues as far as connectivity. The satellite XM radio is very good. I always have good connection. The GPS could be a little bit better. I'm a big fan of what they've done with the RAV4, including the Apple CarPlay, so that I can run apps like Google Maps, because I much prefer Google Maps over the stock Toyota nav. Beyond that, I think it's pretty good. Now, I wish that they retained, like they have on the Tacomas, the grab handles up here for the driver. I've got one on the passenger side, but I don't have one on the driver's side, and that's kind of annoying because I liked grabbing that handle in my old 4Runner, and it was just kind of a nice handhold feature to have. The back seats are very comfortable. I don't find myself sitting back there very often, but when I do, I don't have a problem sitting back there. As far as functionality, everything is good and functional. I know that a lot of people aren't a fan of the huge knobs. I like them. They're a little bit more durable. I'm not a big fan of everything being a touchscreen like it is in some vehicles. I find that's just too much of a hassle to get to, and other than that. Beyond that, another big positive that I really like about the interior is, especially for us overlanders, we add extra stuff to our vehicles, whether that be lockers or lights or air compressor. There's actually a fair amount of places without having to run a switch pro panel or out having to run some kind of auxiliary switch panel. There's actually a fair bit of places to put extra switches. From an overlanding standpoint, that's a nice thing to have, and the fact that they make OEM switches for that is definitely a big benefit. Okay, so last thing I want to talk about is paint and styling. I think the paint's great. I got the aftermarket treatment for the paint, so it's a little bit better as far as how it wears. Beyond that, I think the truck looks great. I have done the TRD upgrade to the front of the truck. I personally think all the trucks should come like this. I think it's more aggressive look. I think it's more a classic Toyota look, and I just think that it looks better. Other than that, I'm a big fan of how it looks. I really hope they don't change it too much in 2020. I've heard they're going to do a big redesign. I'm really glad that it's body on frame. I really like the aggressive front end of it. Styling and appearance-wise, I don't have a lot of gripes. Most of my issues come with powertrain and some of the touches and feels of the inside and the interior. Beyond that, I think it's a solid truck. If you're looking in the market to get one, I highly recommend it.